Hello and welcome to Roundtable. The shooting war in Northern Ireland may have been over for 20 plus years, but the scars, they remain. And the question now is, how close is Brexit to reopening old wounds? It may be only about trade, but there's a great deal more than that at stake. From 1969 to 1998, these were the scenes across what some call Ulster. Catholic and Protestant communities at one another's throats. Republicans versus Unionists. Now, a row over whether Northern Ireland is being unfairly treated by the European Union is threatening to see divisions resurface. Good to have your company. I'm David Foster. With the Republic of Ireland in the European Union and Northern Ireland not, what's causing friction is the movement of goods between the two post-Brexit. The UK says it wants a deal that was negotiated on that changed. And if it's not, then it could put the whole matter into dispute. And that, it's feared, could put the Northern Ireland peace agreement at risk. What's called the Northern Ireland Protocol was agreed because any kind of physical border between the Republic in the south and the north is outlawed under the 1998 Good Friday Agreement, which brought peace and power sharing to Northern Ireland. So goods can't be checked at what is now the dividing line between the UK and the European Union, that is, the Irish border. The protocol says they should be checked as they arrive in Northern Ireland from the rest of Great Britain. But what's become known as the border in the Irish Sea has angered Unionist communities in Northern Ireland, who reject any idea that they should follow different rules to the rest of the UK. I'm delighted to be able to say that joining us on the roundtable today from Dublin, we have Neale Richmond, member of the Irish Parliament from Fine Gael and former chair of the Irish Senate Brexit Committee. That committee no longer exists, perhaps. Neale will ask you this in a moment. You don't think it's a problem any longer? We also welcome to the programme Steve McCabe, Senior Fellow at the Centre for Brexit Studies at Birmingham City University. And he wrote a book on Brexit and Northern Ireland called Bordering on Confusion. Let's try and get rid of some of that today. We also welcome back to Roundtable Robert Oulds, director of the Bruges Group and the author of Everything You Wanted to Know About the EU but Were Afraid to Ask. And since you don't think much of the EU, Robert, perhaps it's a very thin book because you don't think people want to know anything about it. But we'll come to that in just a moment. Neale, let me come to you first of all. Did you think that when this agreement was signed, when we had the protocol put in place, that any of the problems had actually gone away for the island of Ireland?
I think one thing is we had at the time is legal certainty, and we still do have that legal certainty. But one thing I never believed was the slogan, get Brexit done. Brexit is going to be with us for the next 20 years. There is a constant array of outworkings booked for the island of Ireland with everything to do with EU-UK relations, from fisheries to Gibraltar and everything else in between.
OK, but on this particular issue, the border between North and South, did you always think this would be a stumbling block?
Well, long before the referendum, we absolutely did think it'd be a stumbling block, and that's why we highlighted it so much. And indeed, many of those concerns were dismissed by so many, particularly English Brexiteers. But what we achieved with the protocol and with the withdrawal agreement was the best solution to the problems that Brexit caused. Now, unfortunately, we have a British government who are struggling to implement their commitments less than a year on, but we still absolutely believe that the solutions are within the protocol and expect the British government to meet their internationally legally binding commitments.
Does it cause any problems for yourself, your fellow countrymen in the south, or is it something that is just an issue of concern for those in the north? The fact that the goods have to be checked before they're moved on from the ports in the north into the south, does it cause any practical difficulties for you lot?
Not really. In fact, the protocol actually presents many opportunities for people north and south of the border to continue to be able to have full access to both markets. And I must say the checks on goods going from Great Britain into Northern Ireland are minimal, even if there's grace periods still being extended. The checks are minimal. And one thing I will note in the last week, no Northern Irish supermarkets and no Northern Irish petrol stations have run out of food or fuel.
OK, Robert, let me ask you this particular point. If, as some people have suggested, Article 16 is triggered, that there's then a dispute. The UK refuses to implement any of the checks that we've been talking about, even though Neale says they're minimal. Do you believe, as some people have suggested, that this could seriously endanger the peace in Ireland and Northern Ireland?
Well, Article 16 was triggered by the European Union,
Well,
who then wrote back on that.
They said that was a mistake and stopped it almost, well, immediately.
Well, within 7 hours, but the fact remains it was still implemented.
Robert, you have to be accurate if you're going to say that. It was never triggered. There was a 3-hour consideration. Indeed, the Irish government intervened. In fact, what we've seen from the British government for the last number of months is threats to triggering going far beyond anything that happened.
Okay, Neale, hang on a second. I don't want to go into this because I had already pointed out that it didn't happen.
If you want to be pedantic about it, Neale.
Can you just stop a second, please? I'd already pointed out that it didn't happen, okay? So if it happens this time...
It happened for a very brief period of time.
This time, do you believe there is a danger to the Northern Ireland peace agreement? Neale, if you wouldn't mind, I'll get Robert's answer.
The problems with the Northern Ireland peace deal is that the protocol itself breaches the Belfast Agreement. It undermines peace within Northern Ireland. It's something that's been imposed from above without cross-community support, been imposed by the European Union and, of course, unfortunately, the British government as well. It is actually
so
arguably
can I take that a stage further and ask you once again, do you think, therefore, that it endangers the Belfast Agreement?
Well, it breaches the Belfast Agreement, but it certainly endangers peace within Northern Ireland, as we've seen. It has angered unionists, it has created tensions that needn't have been there.
But isn't this just fluffery on the part of the unionists? As Neale says, there are no fuel shortages, no food shortages, goods are moving freely backwards and forwards. This is just the unionists saying, hang on, we want to be exactly the same, when in fact being slightly different is making no difference.
Well, that's not entirely true. Neale is being disingenuous. He was talking from the position of the Republic of Ireland. He didn't really have regard for the shortages that have been inflicted on Northern Ireland. As a result of this, there have been problems. They haven't had the fuel shortages of late, which basically southern England has been affected by. But of course, the fuel shortages didn't affect northern England either. So there has been problems that were caused by the protocol. It has caused economic harm. It has caused disruption to the lives of people in Northern Ireland. And I think Neale should recognise that and the problems that it has caused.
Let me ask you this one in particular. It caused problems in my hometown, food and fuel shortages, which is in the Cotswolds. You wouldn't expect that to be an area that was particularly badly hit. It's caused problems in the southeast of London. You rightly say it hasn't caused many problems in the north. You believe it's caused problems in Northern Ireland. How can you relate that to the protocol when, in fact, the same problems exist in my part of the United Kingdom?
We're conflating two issues. The problems with...
I thought that's just what you were doing.
The problems with fuel shortages, which you referred to as purely came about through panic buying, which is the way the fuel is distributed in the UK. If a few people panic buy, the whole system will reach a gridlock situation. The situation in Northern Ireland was as soon as the United Kingdom had fully left the European Union, but of course Northern Ireland remained tied to European Union rules. There was a whole host of procedures that companies needed to follow if indeed importing from mainland UK, and that created the food shortages. And there were problems that on the shelves, one created by bureaucracy, which is what the European Union is known for. This is why the European Union economy has barely grown in 20 years.
I suppose what I was asking you, and I will come to you, I promise you, in just a moment, Steve, what I was actually asking you was whether you think the unionists are right in saying they think this is an imposition upon them, or are they just using this as an excuse, once again, to ruffle some feathers?
Absolutely. We know from what Michel Barnier said, from leaked recordings, when he was preparing his team to negotiate with the UK, that the Republic of Ireland was essentially, and the border between the Republic and Northern Ireland, was essentially being used as a tool to keep the United Kingdom tied to single market rules. They didn't want a competitor in terms of trade policy, in terms of regulation. And really, unfortunately, Northern Ireland has been the victim of a power play, and the Republic of Ireland mistakenly went along with this. And if they really cared about Northern Ireland, then they wouldn't have inflicted these rules that undermine peace, that have clearly shown that there's been riots, there's been tensions that needn't be there, and has caused material harm for the people of Northern Ireland,
which gives us the right to cancel. We will talk about how this can possibly be solved in just a moment, Neale. I will come back to you. I'm very aware that I've left you sitting there, Steve, for some time, but bordering on confusion, a collection of essays, ideas, whatever it was, printed 2 years ago, about this very situation, the line between North and South.
Correct.
Has that confusion become any less likely now?
Not a bit of it, and of course we see in the sort of the threat to sort of suspend the protocol as being it's the sort of normal sort of sabre rattling we've come to expect from this particular brand of, well, I say the Conservative Party, but of course it's become the English National Party in effect, and of course that's how Johnson sort of got to sort of where he is at the moment. He used the sort of the Unionists, let's face it, of course, he promised there would be no border down the Irish Sea, and that's exactly what has happened. So I understand the sort of the sensitivities.
The Conservative Party has seats in Wales, it has seats in Scotland.
I mean, the fact is, of course, let's go back
Stands in Northern Ireland.
Let's
go
give him a chance,
to the
please.
sort of referendum.
Gave you plenty of time.
Of course, you know, a majority of people in Northern Ireland wish to remain part of the EU. Of course, that decision was taken, which we understand being part of the so-called United Kingdom, although it's increasingly becoming disunited. But of course, let's go back to sort of the basics. Of course, Northern Ireland, I mean, you used the expression, which is a loaded term for many in the sort of Northern Ireland, particularly in the sort of what we might regard as the sort of nationalist community, the mainland. They don't regard themselves being attached to the mainland. Ireland was Ireland in its own right up until 100 years ago and was partitioned to assuage the concerns of the sort of the Unionists at that point. So that's all ancient history. And of course, we went through a conflict, and anybody who lived through that will sort of not forget the sort of the terrible atrocities and the sort of the, you call it the Belfast Agreement, many call it the Good Friday Agreement, it took the heat out of the situation. What, of course, has put the sort of fuel back into this particular fire has been Brexit. Now, of course, as we know, Northern Ireland was the only part of the sort of the so-called United Kingdom with a border or land border to the EU. So there were always going to be problems. But, of course, this was never really thought about until, of course, we got to a situation 2 years ago when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. And, of course, he gave us up to the sort of effectively was Theresa May's agreement, the withdrawal agreement, with a few knobs and sort of...
OK, we're going to hear from Boris Johnson now. This is after his meeting with President Biden, who was said to be seriously concerned about the whole issue.
No, the President, actually, in our meeting yesterday, I don't think it came up at all. We had a meeting of over 90 minutes and it wasn't raised. So there's a great deal of understanding on the part of all our friends around the world that the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is crucial to us and to the world, and we need to maintain the balance and symmetry of that agreement, and that's what we're going to do.
Understanding by all our friends round the world, although you're being rather disparaging about Boris Johnson at the moment, do you think he has that kind of support when it comes to the peace agreement?
So with the support from whom?
Our friends around the world, America included.
Well, I mean, again, the peace in Northern Ireland was one of the great legacies of Tony Blair, but of course we know he sullied that by war in Iraq and all the rest of that. But of course, as I say, anybody who lived through the conflict will realise that there is... when I go to Northern Ireland and I talk to people, it doesn't matter where they come from, all that they're interested in is a sort of better future for their children, one where they don't have to grow up in the sort of the conflict of the sort of the so-called troubles. And the fact is that that has happened. And of course, whether people sort of like it or not, Ireland is a sort of most effective when it's an all-Ireland economic unit. Let's not talk about all Ireland.
So let me throw this in there. You say all they want is a better future for their children. Will they have a worse future for their children with this agreement or without this agreement or without any kind of wrangling that goes on between the United Kingdom and the UK? What do you think, having studied this situation, would be the best way out of it?
Well, undoubtedly. I mean, I appreciate the argument that, of course, Northern Ireland's been used as a proxy and that there's a lot of legitimacy in that. But again, I sort of put it to Rob, so what would you have? To sort of a border back in Northern Ireland?
Well, there needn't be an actual border. Of course, there is a degree already a border in terms of taxation, in terms of VAT. There is some infrastructure to stop people going across the border to buy cheaper fuel. That can be prevented. There's cameras to actually stop that. So there is some border infrastructure already, but none of this is actually needed. If the United Kingdom were to pass a law that prevented people circumventing the single market, as some people had feared, through exporting via Northern Ireland to the Republic, make that an offence in British law, that would resolve the problem. I sincerely doubt that a company in mainland Great Britain, the mainland United Kingdom, will want to be exporting to continental Europe via the Republic of Ireland just to get around the rules.
Can I bring Neale?
That's actually quite absurd. But if that is a concern, which as you mentioned, it was something which the European Union had proposed could actually happen, that people would be circumventing European Union custom rules. But if that is the
Robert,
case...
I think you've made your point that you don't think people will do this and that it's a
No,
way
but
around
we
it.
can
Okay, I
resolve it
want to
legally.
bring Neale back in. You've heard what Robert said, your response to that as well, please. And I want to know how you think this problem can be resolved.
Yeah, I've heard Robert's statements, and the big difficulty here, David, is he's portraying opinion as fact. The protocol doesn't breach the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. In fact, when it was challenged in the courts in Northern Ireland, that notion was struck out. And I'd have to ask Robert, how long has he spent in the island of Ireland? Where did he see these cameras? And indeed, there already is existing borders between Northern Ireland and the mainland,
Exactly.
UK, as he called it. At the end of the day, women in Northern Ireland can't achieve the same sexual and reproductive rights as women in England. Homosexual people couldn't have marriage equality up until recently. There is different VAT rules and so much else. So I think throwing in all these loaded statements and portraying them as fact is grossly irresponsible.
Well, they
And
were
trying to
fact, you've just
paint the EU as
reiterated
the bad guy and saying it's been weaponised is simply false. Prior to Brexit, we made it quite clear, the Irish government made it quite clear that Brexit puts the Good Friday Agreement and the stability on the entire island at risk. The people who pushed Brexit the hardest in Northern Ireland were the hardcore unionists who, whenever they were challenged, well, what's their solution, never presented it. English, predominantly leaders...
Neale, let's not go back so far. And I know with Ireland you always have to
today.
consider the history and the context. But my question to you was, or the second part of it was, how do you get out of this? What do you do?
And it's important, as I said, David, to say the context as someone who grew up in the Troubles, whose vast majority of my family lives in Northern Ireland. I'm an hour away from the border. To hear these statements thrown out, I think it's really irresponsible. But where we go from now, let's be quite frank, within the protocol is the solution to the problems caused by Brexit. Within the protocol, we can ensure the situation that allows people in Northern Ireland to have full access commercially to both the European single market and the British single market.
But they don't.
Now, what needs to happen,
protocol
David,
is the problem.
something that is beyond the protocol is the actions of the British government. And what we haven't seen heretofore is the British government take that on board. Instead, they've pursued the hardest possible Brexit. Tomorrow, we could have a veterinary SPS agreement between the EU and the UK that would remove 85% of checks from Northern Ireland overnight. We've already got a derogation on cancer drugs. There's an opportunity within medicines.
So why do you think that isn't an approach that's being taken? Is it simply to inflame matters as you see it, sort of brinkmanship?
Well, I'm very worried, David, that we're now in the concept of a forever war, that the British government, this British government, is going to perpetually use Brexit as a domestic political tool thing. If they're not causing tensions in Northern Ireland, they're picking rows with French fishermen, they're picking rows over Gibraltar. It's constant and it's utterly draining.
You're taking the
utterly
side of the
irresponsible.
European Union against Britain, which should be the Republic of Ireland's closest allies. Moving on.
I don't want to waste time. I don't want to waste time with name calling. I really don't want to waste time.
To back the French over the fishing dispute is quite
Robert,
remarkable.
Robert, I don't want to resort to you name calling. Roundtable is all about trying to find out what might be happening. You've had a chance to say something. Now, in response to both what Robert has said and Neale has mentioned there, he mentioned a lot of the statements are inflammatory. What do you think?
If I may,
I'm
referring to forever war and saying the British government was stoking
I'm going to ask the director to pull your microphone down in a moment, Robert,
and irresponsible
unless
and inflammatory.
Okay. The one thing I never wanted to do with this programme was have a
concept
shouting match.
Of calling of English nationalism. I've heard plenty of inflammatory comments from your other
I wish you were on
guests.
Skype, then I could just quieten it down.
Well, I may challenge your comments, which were misguided.
It's desperately
Do you want
sad,
to add
isn't it? We get into the sort of the finger pointing and, that
Well, that's what the game that you
just let him say something, please.
I'm not sure how to respond. I mean, Brexit has been an economic disaster thus far. We're told we're going to see the sunny uplands. Well, we're waiting to see them.
And I can see this is going. I can see which way this is going. Let me ask you a particular
Brexit's been
point.
difficult
When
for
it
the
came to
people in
your
Northern
book,
Ireland.
it's been difficult for
when it came to your book,
very beneficial.
confusions, bordering on confusion.
Sure,
What was the overall feeling, if there was one, amongst the contributors about what was going to happen in the next few years or not?
Many people regard us sort of engaging what was known as Project Fear and sort of giving the sort of the worst possible outcome, and quite clearly in terms of sort of the economic consequences, in terms of the hit we're having at the moment.
No, but we're not talking
proven
about
true.
that. We're talking about Northern Ireland
I
in
know,
particular,
well,
and the
well,
protocol.
actually,
What were their fears about that?
Well, again, and again, I appreciate that Robert, if he had his way, he would have had no deal, gone to World Trade Organisation rules. So Northern Ireland would effectively
There was
cut
never
off.
such a thing as as no deal. There'd always be an agreement between the UK.
Well, whatever
and in
it was
fact,
called.
and if we left
Guys,
without
can we
the
please
specific
keep to
agreement,
the subject, which is
if we-
about the
there was
island
a whole host of other
Ireland.
agreements which would have kicked
Otherwise,
in.
I'm just going to go straight
deal
back
was
to Neale.
Project Fear, which you seem to not have
What
moved
was
beyond.
their sense about the future of the island of Ireland? Not so much about the rest of the Brexit.
Sure, but in the context of sort of what went on, that sort of where would Northern Ireland sit in regards to sort of its closest neighbour, which of course is the Republic of Ireland, and of course anybody who knows anything about Ireland will know that sort of being a member of the EU has been very good for sort of communities on both sides of the border, and it's anybody who's been to Dublin in recent years will sort of see the dramatic economic transformation. It's just a shame not more of that is going across the border. So being cut off in effect from that was a sort of big fear, and of course some sort of even predicted maybe there would be sort of the reigniting of the Troubles. Well, I don't think that's going to happen. But undoubtedly, anything that sort of creates the sort of, dropping pebbles into the sort of the pool that is Northern Ireland is a dangerous thing because, of course, as we know, conflict can sort of come
I'm
from
going
any
to go
quarter.
back to you, Neale, and ask you about prosperity, because a lot of what I've read recently is that Ireland economically perhaps isn't benefiting as much from the massive contributions that the European Union put in 25, 30 years ago. Your take on that? And secondly, where this leaves Ireland economically?
Well, David, if you ever visited Ireland in the 1960s and 70s, we were a glorified third world country. We are now one of the fastest economies in the world, one of the most socially equal countries in the world. In fact, I think we're consistently ranked within the top 10 places in the world to live. Indeed, our economic growth forecasts next year are 5 to 7%. We've all suffered from the pandemic, and thankfully we're working our way out of it. But we have a situation here that European Union membership gave Ireland the greatest opportunity. When we joined the EC in 1973, 55% of our exports went to Great Britain. That's now down to 10%. Our biggest trading partners beyond the US are Germany, Belgium, France. Then we come to Britain. There is a great amount of opportunity in Ireland within the EU. We want to actually have the closest possible relationship of any EU member state with our friends in the United Kingdom, but it is increasingly difficult. The topic of today, David, is the situation in Ireland. Brexit poses massive difficulties. Common membership of the EU ensured the Good Friday Agreement actually came into being very seamlessly. We want to have the situation that Northern Ireland can prosper. It's currently the most disadvantaged region within the United Kingdom. The protocol gives it the opportunities. Now, there are issues within the protocol that can and will be worked.
Can I play in something from the Irish
the most
European
dynamic
Affairs
region.
Minister, Neale? Can I play in something from Thomas Byrne on that very issue at this moment? He just had a meeting with the European Commission Vice President, that is Maros Šefčovič.
Well, I think the European Union certainly is in solutions mode with regard to Northern Ireland. Vice President Šefčovič visited Northern Ireland 2 weeks ago. He spent 2 full days there after meeting the Taoiseach in Dublin. I think he listened to business and to civil society in Northern Ireland. I think that was really, really important, because I think one thing that Northern Ireland feels in all of this is maybe left out of the ping pong that's going on. I think we need to put the interests of the people of Northern Ireland first, and that's what the European Union is doing and what Maros Šefčovič is doing.
So the interests of the people of Northern Ireland, Neale, there, as expressed by Thomas Byrne with what he'd heard from Šefčovič, and the game of ping pong. Do you think it's right that Northern Ireland should feel like it's just caught in this battle of to and fro?
Well, it's certainly disappointing, and at this stage of the process, you would have hoped the protocol and people meeting their commitments in the protocol would have given Northern Ireland that element of stability that they've craved throughout this process. As Steve earlier said, Northern Ireland didn't vote for Brexit. We also have the majority of people in Northern Ireland in favour of the protocol.
Robert, do you think Article 16 will be triggered? Do you think it is the only way to resolve this?
Well, if they did trigger Article 16, it isn't complete repudiation. It would just create an opportunity for renegotiation. So it wouldn't be the most drastic measure. And really, it is actually legitimate that the UK would do so, because it would not be a breach of international law. It can be done unilaterally if there's a decision
only 1
taken.
minute to go, so I'm going to ask you, if I may, Steve, if it is triggered, confusion or clarity?
Well, it would just add to more confusion. I mean, quite clearly, it's a nuclear option, and of course, it could sort of unravel the whole of the agreement that was created only last Christmas Eve. So, we're in dangerous territory here, and Frost needs to sort of to recognise, of course, that there's a lot of goodwill in the EU, but that goodwill is, of course, running out because, of course, the EU has proven to be, the UK rather, has proven to be very difficult in these negotiations.
That's David Frost, Lord Frost, the
Look,
Brexit
absolutely.
negotiator. But if it does see the agreement from last December unravel, what will it see unravel when it comes to the peace agreement?
Well, okay, we end up in a trade war, but of course, peace becomes very difficult. As I say, the two communities in Northern Ireland, they've lived, coexisted for the last, 20 years since the sort of signing of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, and of course, they've enjoyed relative sort of prosperity, could be greater. What we're in danger of course, is slipping back into conflict.
Okay, listen, thank you very much indeed. Very good to have your thoughts. Neale Richmond out of Dublin. Robert, good to see you. Sorry I had to shut you up a couple of times, but we have to keep to the point if we possibly can. And Steve McCabe, thank you very much indeed. I had asked you before the programme if there was going to be any update on Bordering on Confusion, your book. You said not yet, possibly because matters are still extremely fluid and what you put out next week may not be that relevant when it comes to a month or two down the line. Much appreciated from all of us for you three to appear on the programme, and thank you very much indeed wherever you're watching this edition of Roundtable for taking the time to do so. Until next time, from me, David Foster, goodbye.